He sat on the side of the subway short wall, just a little after the turnstiles, just before the stairs that led down to the train platform. Before him was his guitar case, currently open, with about $5 of loose change in it. He played his guitar, sometimes singing, but people walked past him, mostly ignoring what he sang. I'd guess he was my age, with light brown hair that hung almost to his shoulders, and green eyes that seemed to twinkle. An old gray unzipped hoodie covered his shoulders, but was open enough to reveal the black t-shirt underneath. Though the hood was down, it half covered the back of his head. He wore old Levi's and a pair of well-worn, lace-up, dark brown hiking shoes, with black strings. A tall paper mug of coffee rested beside him, its cinnamon aroma mingling with the slightly oily tang of the cool subway air and the subtle musky cologne of the man. A subway train's brakes squealed on the platform somewhere below us, and a computer-assisted voice said, "There is a train approaching the station. Please stand away from the platform edge." The man had been here every day this week, finger-strumming and playing songs by memory. He had a nice guitar. It was a well-worn, dark-wood, 6-string, polished to glow like a mirror. He had played it so much that some of the glossy surface around the sound hole had worn away, and it had a faded area where he had repeatedly tapped his hand on the body of the guitar. An older instrument, but one that was well-loved. It had a delightful, mellow sound, not the sometimes tinny sound of a new guitar with brand-new strings, but one that had seen some years. He finished his song. A couple people clapped and dropped some loose change into the guitar case. He nodded his thanks. I blew a breath out, gathering my courage. I had returned to the city a week ago, after being gone for 10 days, and was still feeling the pang of loss. That bittersweet feeling would be with me for a long time. I tossed a 10 into his case and asked, "Do you know Sailing by Christopher Cross? It's an older song." The man flashed a quick smile and said, 1979. I like the classics." His fingers shifted on the old guitar. He tightened one of the tuning pegs and gave a slow strum to make sure all was in tune. His fingers began to move, romantically plucking each individual string. It sounded like the original song. Then it changed. The man used the heel of his hand to lightly tap the body of the guitar, keeping a subtle rhythm and making the song vibrant. The original didn't have that. The man played the song better than I remembered it, and he started to sing with his beautiful voice. I closed my eyes and remembered 5 years ago. I was 17, a junior in high school, and Grandpa and I had taken the Chesapeake Beauty, Grandpa's boat, out into the ocean for the first cruise of summer. Grandma and Grandma live on the coast up in Maine, a little place called Ash Hollow, which is near the historic lighthouse at Cape Sodhurst. Grandpa had pulled out his guitar and sang this song. I joined in, my young voice singing a rough harmony with his old voice. We went sailing 8 more times that summer, and even though I couldn't carry a tune, me and Grandpa sang on every trip. I don't get to see my Grandpa and Grandma very often, but I did that summer. My folks didn't want me around while they hammered out their divorce. I always remembered sailing with my Grandpa and us singing that song a few hundred feet out to sea. The melody of the song carried me away in its beauty. The man's voice, though a little deeper than Grandpa's, was just as incredible, and he finger-picked each note just as good as Grandpa did. For a few minutes, I sailed on the waves of my memory, feeling the salt spray on my cheeks and the setting sun on my face. For a second, Grandpa sat beside me, and we were on the old boat, and together we sang this song, and many more. He loved that boat. I loved that boat. We loved singing together. Grandma didn't like singing with us because I sounded like a goose with a sore throat. Or so she said. The man's song struck me deep, and I simply experienced the sweet melody while humming along. Suddenly, He stopped playing and asked, "You okay?" My eyes whipped open. The man with the guitar had stopped playing, and concern flickered through his eyes. He nodded, and only then did I realize I had moisture in my right eye. I wiped it away and said, "I used to sing that song with my grandpa when we went sailing. His funeral was 10 days ago." "I'm sorry for your loss," the man said. "I'm going to send you off with a smile." The man plucked a few notes and began another song, Lizzo's "About Damn Time." This song didn't have any memories behind it and was just fun. His voice was just as beautiful, and when he finished, a crowd had gathered around us. "You're going to be all right," he said. "Come see me if you need to pick me up. What's your name?" "I'm Cliff," I said. "Scott," he said. "How long are you around?" I asked. "Another 10 days," he said. "Then I'm moving on." "Must be nice to get out of town," I said. Before Scott could respond, the subway voice announced that my train had arrived. I had to run to catch it. I looked back at Scott and found my heart filled with an odd emotion. Over the next week, would I have time to get to know him? The next day, I arrived early. Scott sat at his usual place, plucking away a Fleetwood Mac song called Chain. I paused and listened, and then he played something current, Whisper by Sterling Locke. He'd made a decent haul so far. Maybe even $20 was in his case. Maybe more. I walked up, waited for him to finish the song, and then asked, "You got time for a breakfast burrito? I'll buy if you promise to sing Sailing to me." "Best offer I've had all day," he said. He gathered up his money, stored his guitar in its case, and we walked across the street to Taco Rapido, a fast food taco place noted for how fast they serve their food. We ordered, picked up our food, and sat outside eating our breakfast burritos. "I come to the subway every day. Is the money that good?" I asked. Scott put some hot sauce on his burrito and took a bite before saying, "I don't have money issues, if that's what you think." "What's this about then?" I asked. I wasn't sure Scott was going to answer, but when he did, I wasn't expecting his answer. "My aunt said I'm terminally shy, and she made me a bet." "You're not shy," I said. "You're singing in front of complete strangers." "About a month ago," Scott said, "my mom and brother were teasing me about being scared of my own shadow. My aunt was there, and before I knew it, Mom and Jerry were laughing hysterically as I made a bet with my aunt." "What do you get if you win?" I asked. "Aunt Babs will pay my tuition for the year," Scott said. "Wow," I said. "That is a serious bet. What do you have to do?" "I have to busk for 30 days, he said. "My aunt even picked out the spot." "What's busking?" I asked. "It's a street performer, or in my case, a subway performer," Scott said. "We sing or perform for money." "Explain it to me again," I asked, "because there is something I don't understand. What does being shy have to do with anything?" Scott took another bite of his burrito and said, "I don't do well singing in public, and in spite of that, I want to be a musician. According to Babs, she's my aunt on my mom's side, to learn to sing in public, a musician needs to sing in public. Aunt Babs is like my vocal coach, guitar teacher, and life coach all rolled in one. She's trying to get me to get past my shyness." "Let me get this right," I said. "She bet that you will sing in public for 30 days at a subway station, and she'll pay you a year's tuition so you can get over being shy? Is she loaded?" "Yep, and this is one of her old guitars," Scott said, "and I get to keep it if I win the bet. I only have to play for 2 hours a day, and I get to keep any money I make. Babs even helped me get a busking permit, so I can legally sing in the shadows without the cops objecting." "What if you don't make the 30 days?" I asked. "I don't get to keep the guitar, and I'm on my own for tuition," Scott said. I squeezed a packet of hot sauce on my burrito and quickly said, "Does she keep tabs on you?" "In the beginning," Scott said. "She still sometimes stops by." "Do you feel less shy?" I asked. "I don't know," Scott said. He shrugged his shoulders and continued, "I'm not embarrassed to sing in front of people anymore. I just wish... His voice trailed off. Wish what? I asked. That people would stop and listen, he said. What do you think? Am I any good? I think so, I said. This must be the weirdest bet I've ever heard of. Imagine making someone busk at the subway station as a bet and as a psychological training exercise. It seemed to be working, though. Scott was enjoying it. Scott and I toasted each other with our burritos, and then I walked him back to the subway. As I walked away to catch my train, the gentle strains of Sailing and his beautiful voice caught up with me. I almost missed my train. On our third day, I arrived early so I could listen to him play. I'd also bought him a cup of coffee. He sat on the short wall strumming Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin while singing his heart out. Scott had an incredible voice. The guy knew how to add emotions to his work. Could we get to know each other after he won his bet? A small crowd had gathered about him. I walked over and nodded. Scott nodded back. A minute later, he finished to mild applause. The crowd left, except for me and a woman with once black hair, now heavily streaked with gray, and she was leaning on a cane. Nice job, I told Scott, as I handed him the coffee. He quickly smiled and said, I want you to meet Babs. She's the aunt I was telling you about. She owns a jazz club 2 stops from here. Maybe you've heard of it? Babs' Place? I'm Barbara Riker, Babs said, his mom's big sister and Scott's godmother. Everybody calls me Babs. Scott has told me a lot about you. I'm sorry about your grandpa. Do you play an instrument? I shook my head and said, There isn't a musical bone in my body. Don't worry, we got plenty, she said, and took the guitar from Scott. This was the guitar I used back in college. Let's see if I can still make it sing. She played some jazz piece I'd never heard of. Her voice had lost none of its skill, or timbre, or power. She sang like a star. A few people dropped a couple of dollars into the guitar case. It was time for my train. I quickly hugged Scott, and Babs said, Cliff, I was wondering something. The voice suddenly announced my train had arrived. Not now, when we were having so much fun. I quickly yelled, Let's talk tomorrow. Nice to meet you, Babs. Cliff. Scott timidly yelled something else, but I couldn't understand him. See you tomorrow, I yelled back, and I sped down to the platform. I made my train, and had a feeling that I had missed something. Babs was trying to get Scott to be less shy, which is why he was busking in the subway. Did his shyness extend to dating? After I left the subway, I connected to the Wi-Fi and pulled up the address of Babs' place and read her bio. One of the few female jazz musicians from 30 years ago, she'd made several albums and was known as the Spitfire Diva. Babs Riker married and divorced twice and eventually opened her club. It didn't say anything about her family, like her sister or nephew, or if she had children. It did show pictures of Babs' place, a long, narrow club with the bar on the side and a stage at the end and a dozen small tables. It was a happening place, and the reviews were good. I performed a search on Babs Riker. I'd never heard of her before, but she was considered a pioneer. Back in the day, jazz was predominated by mostly men. The number of women jazz artists could be counted on 2 hands. They said that Babs only had to hear something once, and she could play it, a modern prodigy with an ear of solid gold. The things Babs could do with a guitar had revolutionized music in ways most people would never understand. In the right circles, Scott's aunt was a legend. The next day, I found Scott sitting on the short wall where he always sat, jamming away by himself. He didn't use any music. Did he have all these songs memorized? Today, he played the acoustic version of something modern, 7 by Jungkook. He didn't sing it, obviously, because it was in Korean. Several K-pop fans stood by him and sang the words in Korean while Scott played. The look on his face was sheer heaven. How did he do this? He played a Korean song and he didn't know Korean. The sheet music couldn't have made it across from Korea already, could it? it would still have to go through all the customs and copyright procedures, and it couldn't have even been translated. Unless, just like his Aunt Babs, Scott only had to hear something a couple of times, and he could recreate it. Did Scott possess the same gift as his aunt? Perfect music memory? What did they call it? Auditory eidetic memory? Other artists had been reputed to have this gift, Mozart being one because he could hear something once and compose variations on the spot. That meant that Scott could instantly recreate something new on the spot. Interesting theory, but the reality was that Scott was shy. As soon as the K-pop song ended, Scott began playing Sailing, my song. He switched from one song to the next without even skipping a note. He did look up and smiled as he saw me. I took a seat next to him on the short wall and handed him his coffee. "Your aunt seems nice, but she is pretty intense," I said. "That's Babs for you," Scott said, but he seemed a little withdrawn today. "As I headed to my train yesterday, you tried to ask me something," I asked. "What was it?" He said, and looked away. He strummed his guitar with some random chord and then said, "Saturday night, Milwaukee Nights, that's a jazz band, is playing at her club. She wanted me to perform a couple of numbers with the guys about 8 o'clock. The band has already said yes, but I'm not sure I'm ready. I don't even know what I would play." "Feeling nervous?" I asked. "I've only been on stage once," he said, "and that was back in high school. I made a fool of myself." "I get the feeling you're trying to ask me something," I said. "Ask away." He smiled a little, suddenly very nervous, and said, "I would feel more comfortable if someone was with me. Would you be my date? Babs said she'd cover whatever we ordered, as long as it wasn't alcohol." I took his hand in mine and said, "It's not only a cheap date, but our first date. And it wasn't our last, because a year later, we met up with Grandma in Ash Hollow for lunch on our way to beautiful Nova Scotia for our honeymoon." The end. Hi friends, Gio here. Bad news time. Not too long ago, I had a cardiac episode in the middle of the night. The doctors aren't treating it as a heart attack, but my heart is definitely not working normally. I was diagnosed with cardiomyopathy, an enlarged heart, a long time ago, and it was theorized that my dad had the same condition. Long story short, I've always had a bad heart. Maybe that's why I prefer writing to sports. Since the incident, I have trouble sleeping. I have a strange ache in my chest. My heart goes into odd random bursts that leave me short of breath, and I can't walk as far as I used to. I feel so old. Life changes in an instant. My doctor did an EKG and discovered that my odd heartbeat had gotten odder, and a week later, my cardiologist did another EKG with similar results. My cardiologist scheduled me for an echocardiogram and then for a continuous heart monitor for 2 weeks, with more tests potentially scheduled in the coming weeks. I'm currently on 2 medications, but that could change. Anyway, my stamina took a serious hit. For the time being, I can't focus on my stories like I could. It means that I might miss an occasional Wednesday. I'm still writing, just not as fast, and the stories might be a little shorter, or divided up into multiple parts. Please be patient with me as my heart recuperates. I'll keep you updated as I learn more. Thanks for being part of my channel. I appreciate all of you. Peace.